Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk. I hope everybody is doing great. I am doing all right. I have a bit of a cold. I'm a wee bit bunged up, but other than that, I'm all right, actually, as it goes. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah, I think that would be appropriate for me to say that I'm doing all right. That's probably about as good as it's going to get at the moment. But yeah, so please excuse the snuffles and the snorts. And if it happens, please do excuse the sneezing fit if it happens. But yeah, I'm pretty blocked up, to be honest. So I hope everybody has had a good week so far. We got 10 people here. It's a wee bit of a small audience, but hopefully we'll pick up as we go. Yeah, hope everybody has had a great start to their week. We had a wee bit of a storm earlier today. We had like hailstones that were basically the size of an M&M. Basically, they were kind of, if you imagine the size of one M&M sweet, that's how big they were. So yeah, they were a bit larger than normally we get. Normal ones we get are like pea-sized, so these were a wee bit bigger than that, and they certainly do a wee bit more damage. So that was fun. They were loud, hitting the roof, hitting the windows, but fortunately no damage done to our windows, although I did see some damage to some windshields on a few cars. So but nothing like what I heard about earlier this week, where in Texas there was a world record, or at least it's claimed. It's not been confirmed officially yet, but it is claimed that there is a world record hailstone which was 7.16 inches in diameter. It's massive. It's like, kind of as big as my hand, pretty much. But yeah, the world's largest single hailstone, 7.16 inches, which is mental. But we are, from what I heard, we're still waiting for confirmation as to whether that is actually an official world record. But imagine the strength and power of the updraft that would have created that hailstone, which is basically a bunch of congealed hailstones, all kind of melded together by, I guess, the power of the updraft. Yeah, I would not like to have been hit by that, because basically something that's the size of, this kind of size, if you get hit by one of those, it's probably enough to kill you. But I have seen on extreme weather live streams where you get like baseball and softball sized hail. That's pretty scary. I've seen the damage they can do to cars. So imagine, what that could do to you if you get hit by one. Probably fatal, I would think. Brett says, you didn't sample the sound. No, I did not, actually. I was too busy working, so I did not do that. Aurora's Boring Alice says, a softball at 32 feet per second from 20,000 feet. Looks like we're going to have a wee bit of math here. Yeah, this is bigger than a softball. It's like nearly 7.5 inches across. Nearly 7.25 inches across, I should say. Which is pretty mental, and it's probably falling from greater than 20,000 feet. I would think maybe falling from maybe 40 or 50,000 feet at the top of the at the top of the cloud, when the cloud basically impacts the troposphere. That's probably about 50 or 60,000 feet before the cloud starts to spread out across once it's reached its kind of peak altitude. Yeah, so I'd imagine maybe falling what was it, 9.8 meters per second squared or something like that is the gravitational constant, I believe. So anyway, that's kind of meteorology and math. I'm not into maths, but I'm certainly into meteorology. Anyway, let's see who's here. And I do believe, looking at the excuse me, looking at the top of the chat, we have Christina in Denmark and Ron Figura in the United States tied for first place, being the first in the door at pretty much exactly the same time, which is amazing. Followed 2 minutes later by Billy Morgan and Stephen Wilson, who came in at exactly the same time again, so tied for second. And then Crispin Rackner says, good afternoon to all. Remember, Billy, the first people in the door get yesterday's leftovers. And that's wisdom right there. We got Kyle here, we got Bobby Booth, we got Boris Dancy here as well, we got Don Oliver, we got DJ Vu, we got Brett Marley, we got Aurora's Boring Alice, and who else do we have? I'm scrolling down to see, and we got Just Bob here as well, which is awesome. And I'm just going to quickly check my emails and see if we have any emailed questions, which we do not currently. And we don't yet have any questions on songwriting. So yes, if you do have a question about songwriting, so that can include songs about melody writing, lyric writing, harmony. So that could be backing vocals harmony, horn section harmony, string section writing, or chord changes in general, music theory, that kind of stuff. We can talk all about those. That's what this show does and has done for a good few years. We started this show, for those of you who are new, we started this show over on Jonny Gibe's HST channel way back in, I think, 2017. Not that long after I started my Sunday night live show. Jonny and I started doing this thing that we called Songwriting Simplified, which was originally intended to be a podcast. That was the original idea. It was going to be a podcast. We were basically just going to get on a Skype call, and then we were going to record the Skype call into Studio One, and then we were going to create a podcast. And it's just going to be the two of us talking. And then that kind of changed into, why don't we do it as a live stream on YouTube? Which is what we did, and he hosted it on his channel for several years until basically the busyness of life kind of took over for him, and we couldn't really do it anymore on his channel, so I took it over, and it's been on my channel now for, I think, about 3 years. Maybe less. Maybe like 18 months, something like that. But yes, so I now host it, and I do the show on my own. However, that said, I have had some guests on the show this year. I've had Rich Cresswell here, and I've had a couple of other people, but we also have scheduled this month. I have yet to definitively confirm it, but it is penciled in for June 26th. We should be having Joe Gilder, the legend that is Joe Gilder. We should be having him on the show to talk about his approach to songwriting and arranging and that kind of thing. So that should be exciting to talk to him and get his view. I'm pretty sure that he and I mean, we're in different genres for a start. He's a guitar player. I'm a multi-instrumentalist, but mostly these days a piano player and vocalist. But I come from the jazz world. He comes from the rock and folk kind of world, although I have played in the folk music world as well. My parents, they both play jazz and folk, and so I've kind of worked with them extensively for most of my life. So I'm well versed with certainly playing folk music, but not necessarily writing it. I'm much better at writing in a kind of jazz or jazz pop kind of idiom. So it'll be interesting to get Joe on here and get his take on songwriting. I'm really looking forward to it. Joe and I have been friends for, probably nearly 10 years, I would think. Probably not far away from 10 years, I would think. Not that long after he switched to Studio One, I then switched to Studio One just after he did. I think he may have kind of, full-time switched over to Studio One in 2013, early 2013, and then a few months after I kind of jumped onto Studio One from Cubase. So we became very good friends, and then we both started working at PreSonus at pretty much the same time. Him again just slightly before me, maybe about a month before I did. So I'm very excited to have Joe on the show. All right, so we do now have some questions. So let's go and take a look at what we have. Brett Marler says, would a secondary dominant chord be an acceptable chord to initiate a key change? He says, by acceptable, I'm leaning more towards effective. Rich Cresswell is in the door. Yeah, we've had Rich on the show, which is very, very cool. So, secondary dominance. Let's just get piano sound pulled up. So, secondary dominant chords. What on earth is Brett talking about here? Well, you have primary and you have secondary dominant chords. What is a primary dominant chord? Is chord 5 going to chord 1. So, what do I mean by 5 and 1? Well, 1 is the key that you're in. So, if you're in the key of C major, that is chord 1. So, if you count up the white notes in the key of C major, when you get to G, that is chord 5. And we call this the dominant because it is very, very strong, and it has this strong pulling power towards chord 1. If you were to effectively call chord 1 the center of mass, then chord 5 is like the strongest gravitational influence being pulled towards 1. So that's what chord 5 does to chord 1. So that is a primary dominant. So what is a secondary dominant? A secondary dominant is a related chord that is related to the primary dominant, to chord 5. So, but it's in the same key. So secondary dominants would be chord 2, D minor, chord 3, E minor, chord 6, A minor. All of those are secondary dominants. They also happen to be minor chords in the key of C, but they're also minor chords in any major key. Okay? All right, so to make chord 5 to 1 even stronger, you can put chord 2 in front of it. So chord 2, secondary dominant, chord 5, dominant, chord 1. So 2 is probably the most effective secondary dominant to put in front of chord 5 to go to chord 1. Okay, and this is actually a super popular, super useful little chord progression. Chord 2, chord 5 to chord 1. Because this gets you from, it's basically the key master. It's the master key that unlocks any other key. So if you're in C major, but you want to go to the key of A flat major, well, you just do 2, 5, 1 in A flat. So here's A flat. A flat major scale. So we have 1, which is A flat. 2 is B flat. There's 3, that's C. 4 is D flat. 5 is E flat. So that tells us that we need to do 2, 5, 1 in A flat, which is going to be B flat minor. E flat 7 to chord 1. Alright, so if we are in the key of C major, there we are, we're back in the key of C major. So if I want to go from C major to A flat major, or maybe I'm just going there as a chord. So let's say my chord progression is that's C major to A flat major, which sounds really nice on its own. But what say we want to kind of smarten up that going to A flat a little bit more? Well, this is where we can actually put in a 2, 5, 1 in between C and A flat. So we're going to go C, then we're going to go the 2, 5 in A flat, landing on A flat. So what we'd end up with is this. And that takes me back. doing chord 5, back to 1. And there you have a really nice set of chord changes that sound really complex, but they're not. It's really simple, and you can use this in any style of music. So going from the key of C to the key of A flat, which is like a major third below, is actually really, really effective. It's not a related key at all, but it's still a very effective key to kind of go to, even if you're only going to it temporarily and then going back. So it can be very, very effective in, pop music, it can be very effective in R&B, very effective in gospel, very effective in jazz, obviously. But you will find this kind of cropping up in all sorts of places. So learning 2-5-1 is really, really important, because you can use it to get from one key center to another, or you can use it to add some harmonic interest to a set of chord changes that maybe aren't, or maybe are a little bit kind of separated from each other. So, you could go, you could do the standard C major to F major, chord 1 to chord 4. Or you could put like a 2-5-1 in front of that. So you could go chord C, and there you've got something that sounds, again, complex. It kind of adds a little bit of harmonic interest when you're going between chord 1 and chord 4. Now, even if you don't actually do this literally, you can do this implicitly with how you improvise. So let's just say, for example, I have my band just vamping on these two chords, just going between. The C and the A flat from before. Well, what I can do is I can improvise and then I can hint at this, the 2-5-1 going into the A flat. So you can kind of imply with improvisation the 2-5-1, even if the band aren't explicitly stating it. So very, very useful, and you can add a 2-5 into any set of chords. So you could go from chord 1 to chord 4, add a 2-5-1 between chord 1 and chord 4, and then you could do the same with anything else, going anywhere else. So if you were going from C to E minor, for example, which is maybe not the most secure kind of chord change. So, but you can still apply the same thing. So again, just using a 2-5-1, going into a minor key instead of a major key. So you can do either, and you can create just the same effect. And yes, it might sound a little bit Kenny G, but you know what? All of these things actually have their root in bebop. So it's important to to learn these little things like 2-5-1s, because they are essential to not only jazz music, but they're essential to pop music as well. They crop up everywhere. You'll hear it in Anita Baker songs. You'll hear it in Paula Abdul songs. You'll hear it just like literally everywhere. Michael Jackson songs. There are plenty of 2-5-1s. Listen out for those kind of things and try and identify as many songs as you can that feature those particular chords, and you'll start hearing them crop up everywhere. And then, of course, you'll start hearing the tritonal substitutions of 2-5-1s cropping up everywhere as well. Like when we went from C to A flat, we did 2-5-1. Now, what we could do is we could go C major, and then 2, flat 2, to chord 1. Another tritonal substitution right there. And it just allows for something smooth to lead the ear from one key to another distant key without it sounding weird, and making it sound nice and smooth. So this is where 2-5-1s and adding a little tritonal substitution will really work. What do I mean by tritonal substitution? So instead of playing E flat, there's the E flat, I play a chord that has the same notes as the E flat 7 chord, but it has its root a tritone away. So it has 2 notes in common. So if I play E flat and strip everything away apart from the root, the 3rd and the 7th, kind of covered this before, but it's always, because tritonal substitution is quite a complex thing, it's always worth going over it a few times until you really grasp hold of it. And then once you have it, you can apply it in just about any musical context you want. So E flat 7 with just the root, the 3rd and the 7th. Now if I move this root down 3 whole tones to A, but keep those 2 top notes the same, now I have A7. I have the 7 and the 3rd and the root. And it's the same thing. So I can do B flat minor, A7 to A flat major 7. And it's a nice little smooth thing. So, these will really work in pretty much any musical context, not just a jazz context. And then you can go back and do the same thing to get back into the key of C. So you can do D minor, D flat 7, C major 7. And that'll get you back. And then the secret really there is the voice leading, making sure that the notes between all the chords are moving as close to stepwise as possible, which is what we get here between the B flat and the A7. So those notes there are moving stepwise by half steps, and that's what makes that nice and smooth. And then again there, so we've got D minor, D flat 7. I'm actually doing the D flat 7 with the sharp 11 there because that note is a common tone with C. So it's a nice little common tone, which kind of makes linking the D and the D flat nice, really nice and smooth. DJ V says, because of the trade policy, Studio One, I had to resign and the Studio One service. I'm not sure what you mean, DJ V, by when you say because of the trade policy. What do you mean? I'm not sure what that means. And what are you resigning from? I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to there. You're going to have to kind of maybe unpack that a wee bit. And Just Bob is talking about S1 Box. Yes, I meant to put the link in the description below, and I totally forgot, so I apologize. But yes, that link there takes you to Rich's new website called S1 Box, and you will find some of his incredible, and I do mean incredible. It's not a word I use a lot, but it's an important word, and when I use it, it's because I mean it. Rich's incredible sound sets for Studio One, and he's got a couple up there already, and I know that he's just getting started with this. There's a lot more that he is going to do with this going forward. They don't cost you anything, but there is a link on his site to his Buy Me a Coffee, and here's what I recommend you do. And I'm not going to tell you to do this, I'm going to recommend it because I think this is just the right thing to do. If you like what you see on S1 Box, Rich's new website, and you like the sound sets that he's got there, and you want to download them, the first thing you should do is hit that Buy Me a Coffee and make a small donation. And then go download the content. Now, Rich, I know it would never kind of demand that because that's not Rich's style. And I'm not demanding it either. I'm just saying, hey, I recommend you do that because what he gives away is worth it. Trust me. So I would say please do. I'm going back up here. Just Bob says Asian and Middle Eastern styles use a slightly different tuning. Correct? Yes. If true, how do you incorporate those tunings with standard Western tuning? That's a great question. So how do you fuse Eastern and Middle Eastern music with Western music? Because there are bands that do it, and yes, that's how Bollywood music is made. So how do you do it? How do you take Indian and East Asian and African music and make it fit into a Western kind of context? You have to compromise. That's how. So Bollywood music is great, but it is tonally compromised because they're using Western musical instruments, they're using Western harmony and Western chord changes. But so what they have to do is they have to use a simplified form of their tonal system to make it conform to our Western major minor equal temperament system, because Indian ragas and talas have way more notes in them because their tonal system has more than 12 equal tones. And in fact, they often, there are regional variations in India, but they quite often don't have any form of equal temperament where the difference, the distance between each interval is exactly equal, like we have with our 12-tone equal temperament system here in the Western world. So they have very different intonation, which is why Indian music, to the untrained ear, the unaccustomed ear, just sounds a wee bit out of tune and a wee bit weird. Takes a wee while to get used to the microtonal intervals that they sing naturally, that are actually, between the cracks in the notes, so to speak, between the cracks in the notes on the piano, so to speak. So you can do this on a guitar, you can bend a note. You can do this on a trumpet, you can bend a note. You can bend a note on a saxophone, you can bend a note with a human voice, you can bend a note on a fretless instrument like the sitar. No problem. So microtonal music is actually possible in Western music. That's how the blues developed. Because the blues is essentially a meeting of African non-tonal music and African intonation with Western 12-tone equal temperament, and they blended together. And how do we get those bluesy kind of sounding notes? We bend the notes. And yes, they sound out of tune temporarily. But why are they so acceptable to the human ear? Is it, like 50, 60, 70, 80 years of conditioning that means that we accept blues notes very easily? They don't sound out of tune. That is definitely a part of it, but it's not the sum of the whole. It's because in blues music, those notes get resolved. So if you bend a blues note, you bend that third, that flatted third, you bend it so that it's somewhere between the major third and the minor third, but it's not quite equally between the two. You resolve it. You either resolve it to the minor third or you resolve it to the major third, whichever way you're bending it. If you're bending it upwards to the major third, you bend it upwards and you resolve it. And the same if you are bending it downwards. You are bending downwards to a minor third. So it resolves. Whereas in Indian and African music, those microtones just exist as tones in their own right. So there is no need to resolve them. So to the Western ear, unaccompanied to those intonations and those tonal ideas, those tonal concepts, it's going to sound out of tune. Even though it actually isn't. You're just hearing intervals that to the Western ear don't exist because we are conditioned by, 250, 500 years worth of equal temperament our ears are accustomed to it. We're not accustomed to those other tunings. So you have to compromise a wee bit. If you're going to make a fusion between Eastern, Occidental, African, and Polynesian music and all of that, and try and kind of fuse that with Western music, and, the Beatles have tried it. The Mahavishnu Orchestra definitely tried it. There's lots of Western musicians that have tried to integrate other tonalities and other tonal systems into their music with varying degrees of success. Some make it really work. Some, it doesn't really work at all. It becomes a dilution of the two rather than a genuine fusion. And that's because I don't think necessarily a complete 100% genuine fusion of Western music with other tonalities is actually possible, because you have to inherently compromise one or the other. And you have to decide which one are you going to compromise, the Western tonal system or the other tonal system, to make the fusion work. So that in itself is a debate for doctorate papers. And I did not do my doctoral studies on Occidental or Eastern or Middle Eastern musics. I could have, but you know what? It's a massive subject. It would take decades of study before I'm even ready to write a paper on that. And I just wasn't ready to commit that much time. So, I kind of stayed within the Western tonal system, to be honest. But I did write about how actually, I wrote about where the weak points in the Western tonal system are, and actually how in itself it is a compromise. So anyway, Rose Pouring Out says, a lot of guitarists do various positions on chords. However, an open-ended chord, I ask, how hard is it for you to reproduce them? Inversions are actually pretty easy on piano. And they are laid out just as visually as they are on the guitar. It's just, you're just looking at a different perspective. But they are definitely possible. And in fact, the more notes you have in your chord, the more voicings and inversions that you have. So if we start with root position, C, E, G, we call that root position. But then if I take the bottom note and if I put it up on the top, so I take that bottom C and put it up there, now the third is at the bottom, and then we have the G in the middle, and we call this first inversion. If I do the same again, let's take that E, let's put that on the top. Now we have second inversion. And then if I do the same again, we're back to root position, just an octave higher. Okay? Now, if you add more notes, you will have more inversions to play with. So you'll have, like, let's add a major seventh into this. So, there is root position. Take the bottom note off, put it on the top. First inversion. Take the bottom note off, put it on the top. Second inversion. Now, remember we only had root, first and second inversion when we had just 3 notes. Now we have another inversion. So if I take the second inversion and I put the bottom note up on the top, now we have John Williams's favorite third inversion. John Williams loves this. You hear French horns in John Williams' scores. Do this all the time. Just listen to Star Wars or any of the Indiana Jones films that he has scored. You hear that all the time. That nice, because he likes this. He likes that close voicing at the bottom of the chord. So again, the more notes you add, the more voicings you have, and therefore the more inversions that you have, and therefore the more opportunity you've got for nice smooth voice leading between chords. Which is why when I was doing this earlier, in this one I had the 7th at the bottom of the chord, and there's my third inversion. So those are all third inversion chords. Okay, but when I did this, my 2-5-1 in C major, we've got third inversion there, and then we've got first inversion there, to effectively, with my root at the bottom, I'm playing a third inversion there. So most of what I do is a mixture of like third inversion and second inversion, but you know, you can kind of move these around, and you can have closed voicings. Those are kind of closed, but you can also do open voicings. Now the cool thing about open voicings on the keyboard, you can't really do these on a guitar. They sound great, but you can't really do them on a guitar. They're not necessarily particularly easy to do, which is, you know, I mean, Alan Holdsworth found a way to make some of them work, but again, you're kind of limited by the fact you really only have 4 fingers and 6 strings. Whereas on the piano, yes, you've got 88 keys, but you've got all 5 fingers available to you on both hands. So you can have a 10-note voicing if you really, really want to. Good question, though. Let's scroll down a wee bit. But DJ Vu says, I'm staying with your channel because it's very creative. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Brett says, so the secondary dominant cannot be used as a substitute for 5-1. No, because it's a secondary dominant. But a secondary dominant can become a dominant. It can. So now that's a 5-1, right? So I'm on C and I do D7. Now that's a dominant chord going to 1 to G major. So now that's become a dominant. So I could do. And that was basically a series of 2-5-1s where I went pretty much all the way around to G flat major and then back to C major. But yes, so secondary dominants, they by themselves cannot be a dominant, but they can effectively act in that role under certain circumstances. But yes. I'm going down. I'm going down, 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 down. Minor second interval. Yes, minor second interval. I think you're talking about the tritonal substitution thing there, where you do a chord 2 to chord flat 2 to chord 1. 2, flat 2, substituting for 5, 1. And then you could keep going down that if you wanted to. You can just keep going, and that bass line just keeps going down in semitones, and you're just effectively doing 2-5-1s all the way down, and it sounds a lot smoother than just going, you know, or whatever it is you want to do. And so on and so forth, you know, because your bass is constantly going. Whereas you could just go. And so on and so forth. Which makes, for the bass player, a little bit more interesting, just going 2-5, 2-5, 2-5, 2-5, 2-5, 2-5, 2-5, 2-5. Boring. 2 flat, 2 flat, 2 flat, 2 flat, 2 flat, 2 flat, 2. Much more interesting, a little bit more chromatic, and then you can kind of mix them up where you do some tritonal substitutions and some just 2-5-1s instead. So, and you can create for yourself a really interesting set of chord changes that open up how you write melody as well. So it's not just about chords, because notes of chords can be used for melody. So if you want to make really interesting melodies, then yes, you can use a lot more of these exotic chords like tritonal substitutions, and using 2-5-1s to go from one key center to another key center temporarily to another key center temporarily, all in the context of your overall key center, which might be C major, or it might be whatever key you're in. So yeah. 2-5-1s, they make ordinary chords sound interesting, and ordinary chord changes sound interesting. You know, if you take like chord 1 to chord 6 to chord 2 to chord 5, everyone knows that. Now obviously 2-5-1 in C major is okay, that's fine, but what if we do a 2-5 to get to the A minor? So instead of going, we do this. And I've gone to chord 4 there by mistake, but that's okay. You get the kind of idea. So I'm going chord 1, 2-5-1 in A minor, and then E flat 7 to get me to D minor. And then the 2-5-1 gets me back to C. So okay, so I'll run through those chord changes there. So C major, 2-5-1 in A minor, which is D half diminished, E7, A minor. Now I need to do one in D minor as well. So E half diminished, A7, D minor, and then G7, D flat 7, C major. And all of a sudden, you've turned, you know, your regular into something far more interesting to listen to and far more interesting to play. Backdoor 2-5 here as well. So simple. So simple. And yet it sounds really complex. And it sounds really smart and sophisticated. And it doesn't matter what style of music you're working in. Classical composers have used those devices. You find this in Shostakovich. You find it in Tchaikovsky. You find it in Rimsky-Korsakov. There's all sorts of European composers. You find this in Debussy and Ravel, who made use of kind of tritonal substitutions and, 2-5-1 progressions where they interpolated, which is what I just did there, a 2-5-1 between chords that are target chords, like C, A minor, F, and G, or C, A minor, D minor, and G. Those are my targets. And then I interpolated a 2-5-1 before each of those secondary dominant chords. So A minor, and then D minor, and then G7 to get me back to C. And then I did a backdoor modulation, a backdoor 2-5, where we've got A flat, B flat, C, just because it just sounds good. It just sounds nice. I like using that as a little turnaround. So and it just makes for something that's a little bit more interesting and substantive and less hackneyed and less cliched. And of course it provides a lot more notes for melody writing, and it provides a lot more interesting notes for improvisation. If you've got a guitarist, a good guitar player that can navigate those 2-5-1s really, really skillfully, then they'll knock out a really great guitar solo without breaking a sweat, especially if they've really worked those 2-5-1s. Alrighty, Brett says, Jonny started singing Freddie King there inadvertently, didn't he? No, I didn't sing at all. Kenny Loggins' tune, Whenever I Call You Friend. Yes, that song does in fact use those kind of little 2-5-1s. Those little passing 2-5-1s. To make really interesting tunes. Violins and cello are naturally able to pull microtonal notes off due to not having frets. Correct. And the frets for microtonal guitars have extra frets for the semitones. Yes, the microtones. Yes. Like sitars, for example, they are really a fretless instrument, but you do see kind of these little metal lines in them, but they're essentially a fretless instrument on some of them. But yes, sitars are great because they are fretless. You can get fretless guitars as well. My friend who I work with at Presonus called Sinan, he's Turkish. He's a terrific guitar player, and he plays fretless guitar, and it sounds absolutely gorgeous. So I'm working on a song at the moment, and I'm going to have him play a fretless guitar solo on it. It's going to sound absolutely gorgeous. I can't wait. I've kind of gotten him up to speed on the kind of, sophisticated, complex harmony that I use personally in my songs. So he should be good to go on the guitar solo. I'm really looking forward to it. A little bit of Turkish microtonal music mixed with, kind of my jazz thing. It should sound great. I'm really looking forward to it. Let's see. Somehow I just end up as a splatter of notes left on the bass clef. Yeah, that's easy to achieve. Definitely. All right, we got 9 minutes left here. We got 16 people watching. We got 15 likes. We didn't quite make it to 20. We got 19 people here. You did say the lyrics for I'm Going Down. You didn't intend to do, apparently. Well, I don't know. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But yes, as I didn't actually sing them, there was no melody involved. There's not going to be a copyright strike. So, anyone else got any more questions? I'm going to go check my emails one more time. just to be sure. And nope, there is nothing there. And there's nothing elsewhere. Oh, that's something that I need to do. I just got reminded that I need to do something important tomorrow that I must not forget. Let me go back to the chat here. So tonight there is a Studio One meetup at 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, which is in approximately 1 hour's time. So just over an hour away. Will be the Studio One meetup, which is, I believe it's the Pennsylvania meetup, I believe. Hosted by my good friend Ziggy Ziegler. He hosts a very good meetup. He's really good. He gets you thinking about things, and he stimulates some good conversations. So I definitely recommend it. I'm going to be going to bed because I'm full of cold, and if I have late nights, it's gonna make me worse. So I'm gonna be heading to bed. So I will not be there, unfortunately. But for the rest of you, I hope you have a lot of fun over there at the Pennsylvania meetup. Just Bob says, is there a way to play ghost notes on keyboards, like ghost notes on snare drum? Kinda, sorta. Let's just say it's a tricky technique. It's all about how you articulate the notes. So there are some notes there that I'm kind of only pressing very lightly with my finger, which makes the note kind of very, very soft. And that contrasts with the notes that I articulate much more loudly, which is exactly what you do on a snare drum. Ghosted notes on a snare drum, they're played, but they are played at such a volume that you feel them rather than hear them. That's the skill of playing good ghosted notes. So basically, the best way to play a ghosted note on a snare drum is as you strike the drum, then you bring the stick up and you allow the stick to just drop onto the head very, very lightly on the way up, ready for the next downstroke. So that's the kind of motion. It's kind of a whipping motion developed by a German marching drummer called Moeller. He developed this technique where it's a whipping motion, gets a lot of power behind the stick and into the drum. But on that way up, that's where your ghosted notes can come in. So if you play traditional grip like I do, it's really, really easy to do. With match grip, it's still just as easy. It's a slightly different motion, but you can still make those ghosted notes happen just by basically letting the stick drop in a controlled manner on the way back up from the stroke. And that's how you get those nice feeling ghosted notes in between strokes. And so on the keyboard, you would kind of do the same. So, yeah, so it's a similar concept, except, there's no kind of Moeller technique involved here. You are just like... So yeah, it's all about the art. It's all just like it is on the drums. It's all in the articulation. And by the way, you can do the same on a wind instrument like a trumpet or a saxophone as well. And it's a different technique because you're not striking anything, but the concept is still the same. You can still play ghosted notes. And it's all about how you kind of push the air rather than you articulating the note with your tongue. You just push the air through the note. instead. And so there's no kind of no clear defined start of the note as you play, as you make the note sound. And so that creates that kind of ghosted note effect. So you just push just a little bit of air before you tongue the next note. There's different kind of techniques and ways that you can do that, particularly on a saxophone. And some of that, they call it swallowing the note, where you're not quite sucking in the note, but it kind of certainly feels like you are, but you're not really doing that. So yeah, that's why they call it swallowing the notes. And so that's how you get ghosted notes on a saxophone, on a keyboard, and on a drum. And Aurora Bowling's Alice is saying, check out Dave Weckl. Yes, Dave Weckl I'm very, very familiar with. I first kind of came across Dave in the late 1970s, maybe like 1979, early 1980 maybe. I would have been about, 5 years old, approximately. That's when I first heard Dave Weckl. And boy, he would have been pretty young then as well. And he didn't really kind of massively hit the scene until he started working with Chick Corea in 1984-85 with the Chick Corea Electric Band. But he was already an outstanding drummer by this point in his kind of, I guess, late 20s. But yeah, what a terrific drummer. And, has actually become an even greater drummer in his 60s, which is, I guess, what he is now. I would argue that now he's in his 60s. He's a much better drummer than he was 40 years ago, when he was, to me, quite tight sounding. Now he plays with a lot more fluidity, and the sound he gets out of the drums is much more open. I like it a lot. Anyway, that's it for tonight's show, because people are kind of dropping off anyway. So we're going to wrap it up there, and I will see you guys all on Sunday for Sunday Night Live. Should be awesome. Looking forward to it. And I will see you then. Have a great rest of your week. Have a great first half of your weekend. I'll see you Sunday night for Sunday Night Live, back here, 6 p.m. Central, usual time, usual place, where we'll be talking all about Studio One. So if you've got Studio One questions or stuff like that about Studio One, things that you want to learn about Studio One, maybe you're not very familiar with it and you want to learn more about it, that's the place to be. And if you've got questions about how to use Studio One, or you've encountered a problem, then we can talk about that there. You can either email that to me if it's like a bit more of a kind of more involved question or a more complex problem, then go to the website down there, jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk, hit contact us, fill out that form, send that email to me, and I will help you with your issue, or I will help unpack the concept that you're wanting to learn. Or if it's a fairly straightforward question, then we can unpack those on the day in the chat, just like you guys have been doing tonight. So if you liked what I did tonight with the show tonight, then please do hit that like button. If you've not subscribed before, hit subscribe. Help me get to the next level, which the next target is going to be 6,000. So I want to get to 6,000 pretty darn sharpish. Rich has dropped a link to s1box.com. Please go check that out. Buy Rich a coffee. And, check out the free assets that he's got there. They are freaking awesome. I stand behind Rich's Studio One content 100%. He gets my full endorsement. So with that said, I wish you all a very good night. Good night.